Small single-celled organisms do not require blood because they can absorb nutrients as well as secrete wastes directly into their environment. Humans, unfortunately, don't have this luxury, as our larger and more complex bodies require blood to transport nutrients to all of our cells and tissues, and it is also required to help transport wastes away from those tissues to the appropriate organs where those wastes can be eliminated. This module will focus on the components and the functions of blood. There are 8 functions of blood within 3 major categories. So let's start with the transport functions. Blood transports oxygen, which is absorbed by simple diffusion in the lungs, and nutrients, which are absorbed by osmosis, diffusion, or active transport in the digestive system, to all of our body's cells and tissues, as these are needed for normal cell function as well as maintaining homeostasis. Blood also transports carbon dioxide, which is a gas waste product that comes from the breakdown of glucose, to the lungs where it is eliminated during exhalation. Blood also transports metabolic wastes, which come from the breakdown of proteins and lipids, to the kidneys, where those metabolic wastes can be eliminated in the urine. Blood also serves as one of the major conduits for the transport of hormones, which are the chemical messengers of the endocrine system. The various endocrine glands of the endocrine system will secrete their hormones directly into the bloodstream, and then it's up to the bloodstream's job to shuttle those to all parts of the body. Blood also has regulation functions, and one of the things that it regulates is its pH, as well as things like body temperature and fluid volume. So in the function of pH, it acts as a pH buffer to prevent large fluctuations in body pH. Proteins as well as bicarbonate ions accomplish this function. And here they act as buffers, because buffers are substances that resist changes in pH. And we'll also see that bicarbonate acts as what we call the alkaline reserve in the body, and we'll have a little bit more on this topic in other modules. It maintains body temperature by redistributing body heat to the skin as well as other tissues, because when we are warm, we see that blood flow to the skin increases, as blood vessels in the dermis will dilate and increase blood flow to the skin, so that excess body heat may be lost to the environment. And when we are cold, the opposite happens. Blood flow to the skin decreases, so those dermal blood vessels constrict, to reduce the amount of body heat that's lost to that environment. The blood also maintains the appropriate fluid volume in the tissues. Primarily, there is a blood protein called albumin that will accomplish this. And finally, we have the protective functions of blood. Blood contains several elements that serve in the protective function or capacity. The first is that the blood helps to reduce blood loss during hemorrhaging because of the presence of things like platelets and plasma proteins that form plugs or blood clots to seal breaks in blood vessels when they do occur. It also protects us against infection using leukocytes as well as antibodies that target and destroy things like foreign bacteria, parasites, viruses, as well as tumors. Now let's take a moment and examine the physical characteristics of blood. Blood has a high viscosity, and blood is actually 5 times more viscous than water. So here you may be asking, what is viscosity? Physics describes viscosity as a measure of a fluid's resistance to deformation. So simply this means that if you apply a force to something, how easy is it for that substance to change shape? So viscosity is essentially a measure of a fluid's stickiness in a way. So because we see that as viscosity increases, the stickiness of the fluid also increases, whereby low viscosity means that that fluid has a much lower stickiness. So syrup, for example, has a high viscosity. Meanwhile, water does have viscosity, but the viscosity of water is much lower than that of syrup. The viscosity of blood is mostly due to the presence of the red blood cells within the blood. So higher numbers of red blood cells will give the blood a higher viscosity. In terms of coloration, blood is bright red when it's very well oxygenated, and it takes on a darker red color when it is low in oxygen content. As well as for some of its chemistry, blood is mildly alkaline with a pH of about 7.4. So to remind ourselves of what the pH scale is here, chemistry tells us that pH is a measurement of the acidity or alkalinity of a solution. So for reference here in the center of the scale, we see that the pH of pure water is 7.0. So that means that pure water is considered neutral on the pH scale. A pH of less than 7 means that a solution is acidic, while a pH greater than 7 means that a substance is alkaline. And alkaline substances are also called bases. One thing to keep in mind about the pH scale is that the further you move from a pH of 7, the more acidic or the more alkaline a substance is, depending on which direction you're moving here. Acids are defined as substances that release hydrogen ions into solution. Meanwhile, bases are substances that absorb and take up hydrogen ions from solution. So for example, milk or coffee are somewhat acidic, as we can see that they are only a few scales away from the pH of 7 that we see in pure water. Meanwhile, substances like gastric acid from the stomach, which is very far to the left on the acidic side, is highly acidic. On the opposite end of the scale, we see that things like baking soda and soaps tend to be mildly alkaline. Meanwhile, things like ammonia and bleaches are very strongly alkaline. The temperature of blood is always a little bit higher than the typical body temperature of 37 degrees Celsius, and we see that blood temperature is usually around 38 degrees Celsius, which corresponds to about 99 degrees Fahrenheit. And this is because the water that is in the blood functions to absorb a lot of heat. And then once it's absorbed that heat, water has a tendency to hold on to that heat really well. Blood also has a somewhat metallic taste to it, which is due to the presence of iron in the erythrocytes, that is, the red blood cells. The amount of blood in a typical adult varies with sex. So adult females can have approximately 4 to 5 liters of blood. Meanwhile, adult males tend to have about 5 to 6 liters of blood volume. So keep in mind here that a single US gallon contains about 3.8 liters.